In 1968, the U.S. Supreme Court determined that police officers had the right to stop and frisk potential suspects randomly. Rather than requiring probable cause, police officers needed only to have reasonable suspicion that the person was suspicious. What led to this controversial decision? According to Tiffany Corona in her article, A Public Safety Approach, Reconciling Terry with Individual Rights, a Cleveland detective watched two men acting suspiciously while on patrol. The men were pacing in front of a store, occasionally stopping to stare into the store window and confer with one another. The detective believed they were casing a job and searched them. He found they were carrying concealed weapons, and they were subsequently arrested and convicted. The offenders appealed the decision, and the Supreme Court held up the detectives' actions. This case was Terry versus Ohio, and it put stop and frisk laws into effect.
Stop and frisk is as hot a topic as ever these days, and as a civilian in a country where stop and frisk is being pushed to be more of a norm than it is now, it's important to know the rights you possess and what the police can legally do to you. Civilians should know that if a cop comes into contact with you, they can put you down or they can pat you down for their own safety, and this will almost never violate the Fourth Amendment. Civilians should also know that any hard objects in their pocket can be removed from that pocket and then examined by the police. And it should also be noted that anytime they find a weapon, you can be charged with possession of an illegal weapon if you don't have the proper paperwork. You can still be protected from other things in your pocket being discovered. If police feel something soft that they think is drugs, they're not allowed to pull it out and get you in trouble for it. Also, after a stop and frisk pat down, you are allowed to deny any more searches of your being or property, such as your car or house.
Looking deeper into the research and data of stop and frisk, it is clearly evident that the procedure is not necessarily decreasing crime. In an NYCLU stop and frisk data chart, it shows that from the year 2006 to 2008, as the number of stops went up, the amount of homicides significantly increased. Moving forward from 2012 to 2015, the amount of stop and frisk fell dramatically. And as it continually decreased, the amount of homicides in New York City did as well. Stop and frisk procedures also had no effect on the crime rate. From the years 2006 to 2015, as the amount of stop and frisk went up and down, the crime rate stayed almost virtually the same for almost a decade. Stop and frisk procedures had little effect on gun control as well. Studies have shown that it is very rare to find guns through a stop and frisk. According to NYP's data, only 36 guns were found of every 10,000 weapon-related stops. Looking at all of the data, it signifies that stop and frisk procedures are doing more harm than good, and it is very rarely beneficial.
According to the New York Civil Liberties Union, over the past decade, the amount of people who were stopped for stop and frisk procedures have fluctuated. What has remained the same is the percentage of different racial groups who were racially profiled, stopped, and then frisked. In all these years, Black people were the majority of people being stopped, coming in with over 50% each year. Trailing right behind them were Latinos, leaving white people with a 10 to 11 overall percent of people who were being stopped each year. To add, about 75 to 85% of the people who are stopped and frisked each year have been innocent. Police are supposed to fill out a form in full detail about the time, the race, and the place of their stop and frisk incidents, and the data has been recorded from the New York Police Department are the basis of this argument. It's fair to say that the police officers racially profile people of color and automatically associate them with crime.
According to a study published in 2014 by Evdi S. Evdija on police stop and frisk practices in the International Journal of Police Science and Management, gender results came out with the highest odds ratio. Males in this study were 2.8 times more likely than females to be stopped and frisked. In general, it is found that of the suspects, 83.7 of them were male, but only 7.1 were female. In a quote from this article, quote, "Based on this evidence, one can argue that this is a form of gender policing," end quote.
Over time, there has been many changes to the stop and frisk procedure. The police had followed along with the practice of stop and frisk until the Supreme Court evaluated it back in 1968. One example of how stop and frisk has been changed over time is that officers have been given detailed new guidelines on how to conduct it. It has also been a requirement that some police officers wear cameras now. In order to conduct a stop and frisk, an officer must have reasonable suspicion that the person has committing, or is about to commit a felony or misdemeanor.
So there it is, folks. Is the stop and frisk really helping the crime rate? Did you know you have rights? Do you think you've been illegally searched because of discrimination? Did you know you can refuse a search as long as there is no probable cause? Today we discussed key points in knowing your rights when arrested. In Terry v. Ohio, we learned that probable cause is needed in order for a proper search to be conducted. Officers are allowed a pat-down, and upon finding reasonable suspicion, they will be able to detain and conduct a search of your property. We learned that racial, sexual, or age discrimination is not a probable cause for a search. Based on statistics, more people of color, male gender, and younger adults are more likely to be stopped just because of something they cannot control. Many do not know that you may also refuse a frisk entirely. If you consent to the search, know that the officer cannot pull items out of your pocket unless there is reasonable suspicion to believe it might be a weapon or drugs. The idea that stop and frisk is actually helping our community is a myth. It was believed that crime rate would go down when stopping to frisk more subjects on the streets, but gun violence has stayed virtually the same. Stop and frisk situations can be tricky. If you believe you've had your rights violated because of discrimination or unreasonable suspicion, you can get help now by contacting the H&M Law Firm in Chicago, Illinois at 443-791-8625.